Welcome to the On the Move as we celebrate December 18, International Migrants Day. Today, I'm very happy to host Sean Binder and Nasos Karakitsos. Most of you watching the program regularly know who they are, but if you are new, I would like to briefly introduce them. Sean Binder, hello Sean, we can call him as a defendant in trial. He's trained as a search and rescuer and coordinates search and rescue in Lesvos. He's currently working on legal reform in UK and in Europe. And we have Nasos here. Welcome again to you. And Nasos was in Lesvos for about 2 years in 2016 and 17 as a field director in an organization coordinating search and rescue teams, medical teams, as well as non-formal education and activities for children. After he was released from prison, he worked for IOM as facility coordinator and team leader to shelters and facilities with unaccompanied minors. And currently, he's still working at an NGO in Athens as a program assistant. Thank you guys for being here. I appreciate you joining the program.
Thanks for having us, Begüm.
So for our audiences, to kind of introduce the subject, hundreds of people like Sean and Nasos face criminalization and other obstacles for doing humanitarian work, helping refugees and migrants across Europe. In Spain, Italy, France, Poland, Malta, Cyprus, the numbers and the countries actually seem to be increasing every day. We see restrictive sanctioning and punitive measures against people who defend refugees and migrants' rights, targeting of activists, lawyers, journalists, as well as humanitarian aid workers. On January 10, on the Greek island of Lesvos, and our audiences know my particular interest and work for a decade now in Lesvos, we are expecting the trial of 24 humanitarians, including Sean and Nasos, who are accused of multiple trumped up and completely unfounded charges for helping people on shore. So the first hearing was supposed to take place in November 2021, but it was adjourned due to technicalities and it was referred to a higher court, which meant prolonged injustice for all the humanitarians. And if the audiences want to hear more about that trial, you can go back to the On the Move we did with Adriana Tidona from Amnesty International in November 2021. We did a program right after the first trial. So, Sean and Nasos, before we go on to the trial and criminalization of solidarity in Lesvos, I first want to start with establishing what humanitarian aid work is, because in many instances we find that actually people do not really have an understanding what humanitarian aid or humanitarian work means. So maybe Nasos, we can start with you if you could explain what humanitarian work is, especially at the borders, working with people on the move.
Okay, I will start with one song's phrase that if you see a car accident, the first thing you will do is to go there and see if the person there is okay. I think we can start from there, because helping people in need in general, not just the refugees or migrants, is something human. I mean, it expresses all human beings. So for me, if someone is humanitarian, is something like this: to help people, no matter the religion, no matter where are they from. Helping people is exactly this. So in Lesbos, we were there from all over the world, so many people, thousands of people. I mean, I met so many great people, young people, older people, and they were there for one common scope, one common purpose: to help people you don't know, you don't even imagine how they live and from where they are from. So it was something very big, and humanitarian is just to help people in need. The simplest thing to the more, to the most dangerous thing, you can help them. Search and rescue on sea was very dangerous for us also. And for everyone that works in this field. So it's very dangerous for the people, of course, for refugees and migrants, and also for the people that they are there to help. So yeah, working or volunteering in this sector is something very, very good and very precious for humanity, I believe.
Yeah. Sean, is there anything you want to add?
I think I would just add that, I mean, I agree with what Nassos has said. I think that we also see the criminalization not just of humanitarians, but also of people who I would class as solidarians, people who aren't necessarily categorized as humanitarian workers, but who nonetheless have been criminalized because they have shown some kind of solidarity. And so maybe it's useful also to just define what solidarity is, because I think that's also a pretty vague term, perhaps even more vague than humanitarian. And what I would define as solidarian, or to demonstrate solidarity, is simply to help people in contexts where you wouldn't expect to be helped. So as Nassos said, if we see a car accident, you're a helper when you go and you check their pulse. But if you do the exact same thing at the border, you're somehow doing something different. For some reason, we classify certain people as not needing that help or not deserving that help. Mm-hmm. And so if you go out of your way to do it, you're now not a normal person, you're a solidarian, which I think is a kind of a misleading statement, because it frames the kind of work that we've done as being somehow unusual. So I think it's really important to reflect on that. Solidarian is just someone who provides help like everybody else does in a context where generally as a society, we don't expect it as a given.
Yeah. Why did you guys go to Lesvos for the first time? And while you were there, what was your everyday life like when to support the people who were arriving on the island? Either one of you can start. Nassos, do you want to start?
Yeah, I was working on merchant vessels, so I received an email about volunteering in Lesvos. So I had the knowledge and the training before, because many years ago I was in Army and Navy forces, Greek Navy forces. So I had the experience and the training. So I have decided to go. I said to myself, yes, you must go, because it will be the first time that you help actively and you use your knowledge to help people. And I went there for 15 days. 5th of January was my first day there. It was a tough day. And after 15 days, I said, okay, I will stay 15 more days and 15 more days. Yeah. And
this is what happens with Lesvos, I think. You go for once and then you are signed up to it for all your life.
Everything there. Yeah. Everything there was so strong. And for me, I was Greek. I was just maximum 1 hour far away from my home, from Athens. So I saw people from all over the world leaving everything behind and come to help. So I was saying to myself, come on, Nassos, you're just 1 hour far from your house. And you have people there, young people, 22, 20 years old, 23 years old. And they came from China, from everywhere, and the United States, from all over Europe. So I was, I stayed there. Yeah.
And what was the work that you did as search and rescuer in Lesvos?
So back then there were so many NGOs, so many rescuers and people that in general helping. So we were, we were on shore, and we received boats. When boats arrived, people were wet, people were hungry, people were lost, but they didn't know where they were. So we were there to inform authorities to come and help them. Many times we need ambulance. Many times we were there just to help and give them blankets. Nothing more, nothing else. simple things, because I was putting myself to their position, and it was good to have someone waiting for you when you are out in one place you don't even know where you are. One smile is enough, one blanket is enough, one bottle of water is enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, to clarify that actual confusion upon arrival, one of the locals I spoke with this summer, he was explaining how people were completely unaware of where they were, and so they were asking them where the train station is. They practically landed on Lesvos, on an island, and they imagined to be taking a train to go to Germany, for example. So the whole geographical confusion, the whole chaos of arrival is very difficult for a lot of people, and it is very important that actually, as you say, that somebody is there to say welcome, not only, but to also provide information as well.
Yeah, and inform authorities. It's very important, this, because we were informing authorities, because authorities were the responsible, responsible to transfer them, to register them, to provide, accommodation, let's say. And yeah, and something else, thousands of people. I mean, I met so many people that they had never seen ocean again, never. So imagine, during the nighttime, winter, and they were crossing sea. What is sea? It's crazy.
Sean, how was your story?
My story is less impressive. I think, where did I go? I think same reason why many youngsters go anywhere, which is probably a whole bunch of naivete and ego and all kinds of things. I had just finished my master's degree, which was focused on European defense and security policy, which is not very employable, let me tell you. But what it did is it taught me about how the European Union deals with one of the most severe humanitarian crises. Of course, the so-called migration crisis. And that is by securing our border against people at risk of drowning, rather than, for example, helping people at risk of drowning. And so I felt that I knew the policy framework that was happening in my name, because as a European citizen, what happens at our border happens in my name. And I disagree completely and fundamentally with our policies. And I also have some practical training. It's not nearly as qualified or as good as Nassos's, but I have some rescue diving training. I've spent time on boats myself. And so I felt, to complement the policy understanding, I have a practical understanding, and I can go and volunteer for, as Nassos says, you go for a couple of months and you end up staying for a couple more months. And so that's what I did. I joined ERCI, the same organization that Nassos was directing, and was there for about 9 months or so, till we were eventually arrested. And my day, not unlike Nassos's, was also less dramatic. My time was not characterized by going out to sea. My time was characterized by waiting at the shoreline for hours on end. At this point, the authorities were less likely to ask us to go out to sea. So when we went out to sea, it was purely for training. We did a lot of training, but rarely the authorities asked us to assist in search and rescue operations out at sea. And so what I did a lot of was standing around at the shoreline from the hours of midnight to 7 a.m. almost every night, looking out and waiting to respond in case someone was in distress.
Then what happened?
We all went home and it was great.
What about the imprisonment?
Oh yeah, you're right.
There's something like that about 106 days, I think.
Well, I guess I can lead on that, Nassos, given that it was Sarah and myself who were first arrested. It was one night that I was just describing. I was at the shoreline, the very, very southern tip of the island of Lesvos. It's a place called Katia. It's basically a car park on the face of a cliff. And it is one of the last points on the southern tip of the island that is easy to access the road from the shoreline. And so it's one of the most important points of access for our medical teams, because we're one of the few organizations that had an active medical team to respond to people in distress. And around 3 a.m., Sarah Mardini, a friend of mine and our co-defendant, and I were sitting in the organization's Jeep looking out to sea when the Coast Guard comes up, parks next to us at Katya, and asks us for a passport. We give them our passport. They walk around our Jeep and they begin to mutter that it might be a stolen Jeep, or it might be a Jeep designed to spy or access a military base. And at this point, we didn't really understand why these claims were being made. They invited, Sarah and I invited, they didn't give us a choice, to go with them back to the Coast Guard station, which is in the town of Mytilene, to answer more questions. We spent a night in a cell, really bizarre. Sarah and I were in the same cell. The Coast Guard police were saying, we're not sure why you're being arrested. We don't know what's going on, because we had worked together with these people for a long time and quite a few of them were friendly with us. But their captain was less friendly. And the following day, they took me under armed guard to my home and to our warehouse, and they searched everything. They took our electronic devices. And we spent another night in prison, or in the cell, and we were released pending further investigation. And at this point, we still didn't really understand what was going on. We knew that they had obviously arrested us, they had fingerprinted us, they had taken our devices, and there was a further investigation pending. But what for, we didn't know. And then it wasn't until about 4 or 5 days later, a Greek-speaking friend of mine overheard, as we were spending time in Mytilene town, 2 old men driving by on mopeds. And because they were driving by on mopeds, they were shouting to each other a conversation. And the Greek speaker overheard one sentence, which is, and a German spy was arrested a couple of nights ago. And her jaw dropped. She asked, is this referring to your arrest? And so we found that one of the police officers had leaked a story to the police. Had leaked a story from the police to a far-right online news outlet. And we found the article, and it said something like this: a German spy has been arrested in a stolen military truck trying to break into a naval base with a Syrian accomplice to steal state secrets. And we thought, this is a joke. This can't be real. And so we thought, it isn't real. And we continued to work with the Coast Guard for months and months and months. And in all that time, they were gathering evidence against us that we are heinous criminals who have been facilitating illegal entry, who have been money laundering, who are masterminds of a criminal organization, who've committed forgery, and all kinds of other crimes. And so when the investigation finally gathered steam, Nassos, the organization, Sarah and I were invited in for further questioning. And eventually we were detained in pretrial detention for 3.5 months, as you said, until eventually being released on bail.
Yeah.
That's a whistle-stop tour for you about the arrest process.
Yeah, I didn't actually know as detailed of how the process developed in before your pretrial detention, because usually the story is being told in a very quick summed up version. So actually you think this has happened in a matter of few days, but rather this is a months ongoing sense of insecurity as you actually provide humanitarian work on the shores.
I would just add to that oftentimes you get this impression that the Coast Guard must not have wanted us there, then that in some way we were in conflict. And Nassos can speak about the relationship between the organization and the Coast Guard better, but I just give an anecdotal evidence of how I think we were actually wanted by the authorities, is that our organization, ERCI, taught some of the police officers in some of the camps how to do first aid. I remember receiving an email from a British Coast Guard vessel that was in operation as a Frontex asset at the time that I was there, asking me to replenish their stocks. This is not the kind of communication that comes from an organization like Frontex that doesn't want you there. It's the kind of communication where they clearly indicate that they want us there, because without us, they wouldn't have been able to do their job. And so I think it's really important to point out that civilian search and rescue doesn't try to replace the authorities. Unfortunately, the authorities can't do their own job very well in most or in many contexts, and that creates a gap in the service. And if NASOS and search and rescuers don't step into that gap, people will fall through it and they will die.
Yeah, exactly. NASOS, do you want to add to that?
Yeah. It was crazy for me because I left Lesvos December 2017, before all this happened. And when I heard about this, I was, wow. I was in Athens when everything happened, and I took the ferry boat and I went to Lesvos, and I detained with Son and Sarah. It was something unexpected, and something I was, till the last day, I was thinking it's a big joke. It is actually a big joke, but I've never expected something like this, because as Son mentioned, we had very good relationship and cooperating with Coast Guard and Frontex all these years, because obviously they had the gaps and we were there to fill the gaps. And I think when the time comes and they felt that, okay, we don't have any other gaps, so yeah, get rid of them. I don't know what happened, and I don't know what happened with Coast Guard, because all the accusations came from police, and police didn't ask Coast Guard. When they asked Coast Guard what happened, officers from Coast Guard went and testified, not against us, positive about us. So that's why we were also, after 3.5 months out of the prison, it was one of the reasons. I think it was political. This huge bubble. It was political, and it was something very strange for us, and it was the first time something like this happened. It was very difficult for us. It was, yeah. Still, we have nightmares, I think.
Yeah. I mean, I on purposefully don't ask that duration. Of course, it's up to you if you want to share. But was there any other cases at the time, or is your case the first on the island? Were there detentions or there other cases that were targeting the humanitarian aid organizations or solidarity groups at the same time? Now we see an increase of it, but yeah, in terms of that period,
back then was one more case, 2016, with two NGOs, Spanish NGO and NGO, sorry, from Denmark, if I remember correctly, and some small because of, the small things. They didn't have a driver license, international, some small things. But mainly there were one more case, but it was 2016, yeah. And after it was ours.
Yeah. I think the interesting thing about the previous case that happened in 2016, which involved Spanish lifeguards and a Danish guy, Salam al-Din, that case, the sole charge was aggravated facilitation of entry, aggravated facilitation of illegal entry. And that's because they also had a search and rescue boat, and they went out to interact or rescue a boat in distress, I think without waiting for permission from the Coast Guard, which is something that we always did. We always waited for that permission. In an emergency, they went out and they helped. When they returned, having saved those people's lives, they were arrested. They weren't held in pretrial detention. The case dragged on for years. They were eventually acquitted because, of course, there's nothing wrong or illegal about helping people in distress. It was aggravated because they had a knife on board, which is ridiculous, of course, because every boat will have a knife on board to cut lines.
Yeah. It's like one of our accusations, because we had radios, VHF radios, Navy, naval radios. We have them, with us. It is one of the accusations we face.
I mean, you guys are tried for espionage. So, like, I mean, I don't want to laugh at it because there is actual serious to it. But on the other hand, it is like a joke.
I love that accusation. For me, it's my favorite one. I think it has boosted my ego infinitely. I love it.
Yeah.
But
for me, it's a bit more difficult because I am in Greece. So if you are Greek and you are spying against your country, it's not so good. Yeah.
But especially with Greek citizens currently in journalistic work, in humanitarian work, in any NGO work that works with refugees and migrants, on people on the move, this is especially one of the things that the Ministry of Migration and the government is actually using as a treason to their own country, as they are traitors to their own country. And this is one of the most important issues, not just for anyone, but for, in my understanding, for Greek citizens. This is disabling their everyday life as well significantly, because then it's making you a target in Greece as well by far-right groups and or other anti-migrant, anti-solidarity, groups. And so in that sense, I think that's one of the things that, from my experience in Turkey and elsewhere, that's what we see, right? When the NGOs are being targeted and criminalized, it's not because you're afraid, but it also limits what you can do to protect your own safety as well. And this is an indirect way of stopping solidarity, basically.
Yeah. And the irony, of course, that at the same time, the Greek government is being pulled up in front of the Pega Committee because it has been spying on its own ministers and on journalists and on humanitarians while accusing others of doing so. It's worthwhile unpicking. I said a moment ago that it really boosted my ego being charged with spying. It drops my ego completely when I tell you what for. It's not very impressive at all. In fact, Begüm, you would also be accused of spying because you and I communicated on WhatsApp, which is the backbone of why we're supposed to be spies. The fact that we were using encrypted communications must be evidence that we're trying to hide something from the authorities. Well, I'm sorry, every single social media application is in fact encrypted, which means every single one of us is a spy, which is obviously preposterous.
Yeah. And there was recently a piece published on how actually these social media sites and social communication sites are extremely monitored by more and more, not just by authoritarian governments, but by many European governments themselves to monitor their own citizens. But I guess that's a different story. To go back to the case, Sean, you're also on social media in other instances. You're very highly, very, very regularly, you're highlighting the procedural errors made by the prosecution, including, Sarah's restriction to enter Greece as well, because this is one of the, all defendants must be able to be present to defend themselves.
Right to a fair trial? What do you mean?
Yeah, I mean, this case is a huge kind of failure on access to fair trial. But could you guys let the audiences know what are the procedural issues with the case?
Either Sean, you can start. Yeah, Sean.
Sure.
You're a legal expert. Yeah, you are. We are actually.
Yeah, to be fair, at this point.
Yeah, 4 years now. Yeah.
Save some money on our legal fees. Represent ourselves.
Well, this is what happens, right? The more you follow the more we do human rights work, the more we're actually getting trained in law because of human rights violations and these access to fair trial issues. This is very this is true for all of us. Go on, Sean.
Well, I mean, look, there are the obvious ones like bringing a challenge in a timely and fair manner, that is, having a trial within a reasonable amount of time. We will likely be going into our 5th year now. We will likely have to wait years and years more because the investigation for the felonies hasn't even concluded yet. And we could be waiting another 15 years for that to happen. That obviously speaks to me to a lack of a fair trial because it hasn't bloody happened. Nor will it happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
But focusing specifically only on the indictment, only on the piece of paper that calls us to prison and calls us to trial and tells us why we're being called to trial, focusing only on that, there are so many procedural violations. For example, it was issued to us in a language that most of the defendants don't understand. Now, as an English speaker, I have a right to receive information in English. Wasn't observed. The indictment was also completely devoid of names. It doesn't say what individuals are being charged with. How can you prepare your defense if you don't know if you're named and if you are named for what charges? The indictment was missing a page. It was just missing a page. We have no idea what it says on that page. We don't know where that page went. It was just missing a page. And the list goes on with just fatal errors, repeated errors by the prosecution, which leads me to ask, can this prosecution be in good faith? If, as the story goes, Nassos and I are mastermind criminals who have amassed millions of dollars in the most horrible of ways, then why would the prosecution not work overtime to put us behind bars? It's because they know we're not guilty. It's because they know the best outcome they can achieve now is by making it take as long as possible. Because as soon as we go to trial, we're innocent. And as soon as we're innocent, everybody, all the organizations, all the volunteers, all the people who've been afraid to volunteer, to do search and rescue, to help people in distress, will know that they're allowed to return to the island, and they will. And that's exactly, from my perspective, why this prosecution is taking so long, because it's a chilling effect on solidarity and humanitarian activity.
Yeah.
Maintain the fear. Maintain
Sorry?
the fear. Maintain the fear. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's obvious. Obviously, they maintain the fear. Nobody wants to go there and help because they are afraid. People are afraid.
Last year during the trial, so you have misdemeanor charges and felony charges that are targeted against you.
Yeah.
But one of them, you don't have an indictment even yet. So how do you even know those charges if there's no indictment?
The accusations exist, but not in how you say, not in an official way. We have just the papers that they say 88 pages, I think, and we have the accusations that not sorry, but not something official, because they should, as Sean mentioned, I think the procedures all should be concluded, and then we'll decide if we will go to trial or no. Okay. But I think we have,
a long way.
Years.
And a few days ago, you were, I don't know if Sean, you were there as well, but you were Nassos. I remember you were in Lesvos because you were invited by the prosecutor, and Sarah was finally back in Lesvos. So are the charges again, is the restriction ban lifted, or was it a temporary thing? And why the prosecutor invited you? Because from the Instagram that I follow you, I saw that you were there for 5 minutes, Nassos, and nothing was actually really addressed.
Nothing. Something to add? No, I don't. Thank you very much. The only thing, it was a felony that they took back. They disregard, but fraud. Because
fraud.
Yeah. So no fraud.
But the money laundering remains, I assume.
Of course.
And what about Sarah? Will she be able to, is she allowed to enter? We don't know.
It was a temporary lifting of her travel ban. We will reapply on the 1st of January, about 10 days before trial, for her to be permitted back in. The reason that she's not allowed in, by the way, is because she is supposedly a national security threat. We have asked numerous times In fact, we had applied, I think, 6 or 7 times for the travel ban to be lifted on the grounds that there's no evidence that she's a national security threat. How could she be a national security threat? Because she and I face the exact same charges and I'm not a national security threat.
Yeah.
But it was lifted only temporarily for the deposition that she had to go to. So the difference being, the reason why it was lifted for the last time she was on Lesvos is because if she wouldn't have gone to the thing that Nassos just described, where he was asked if he had any further questions, they're the same thing. If she wouldn't have gone to that, they would be forcing her to break the law because she has to legally be there. But there isn't a legal requirement, apart from her right to a fair trial, to attend her own trial, for her to be let back in for the trial. And so we're hoping that it is observed, but we're not guaranteed that it will be, because the prosecution, frankly, doesn't seem to care so much about fair trial issues.
Yeah, no, that's what I understood as well. It's a temporary lift, which means still there's a continuation of her access to fair trial during this process. If we want to talk about the issues in general, then I also want to talk about, as you guys said, that this trial case is instrumentalized, and many other cases as such in Italy, in Poland, elsewhere, are used by states to intimidate civil society. So, you know, in here, it is very clear what the message is being given, which I don't think is just by Greece. It's a European message, in my opinion. This is not just a Greek message. This is a European message. So from that point, of course, rightfully, the trial and imprisonment had serious impacts on your own lives. But also, as you have spoken about, the erasure of humanitarian work on the islands and the regulations brought to the NGOs have a much bigger impact, maybe, or let's say as big impact, it differs, on the lives of people on the move. The states, the new PM the prime minister, right, in Italy now said, let them sink on the Mediterranean. So these are they are the states. Yeah.
Just thank God for Meloni. She's great.
Yeah. Just to make sure that we don't receive another, she's also opening up a lot of accusations and court cases against people who criticize her as well at the moment, even before her position as the prime minister. But the states, such as the Italian state, are directly complicit in human rights violations at the borders. And not only because they do not save lives, but also because they force the humanitarian organizations out. So from your experience, can you guys tell me a bit more how these policies are affecting the lives of people in need or in need of rescue? Because you have been on the ground, you've been working on this day and night, and now that when I was in Lesvos this summer, I took the memory lane and I drove through with a colleague who used to do search and rescue of all through the shores, and now there's the camps are replaced by football fields. The areas where there were first receptions, the bushes are grown back. There's no search and rescue anymore, basically, huh?
Also, it's very sad because it's like nothing happened there, and it's history there. So many people were there, so many people, and it's very sad.
But this goes with the normalization and making the arrivals invisible, the pushbacks invisible as well. So I really think we also need to talk about how this criminalization of solidarity is actually affecting people on the move as well.
No, I think Nassos has a lot more experience with interacting with people, more than I have.
Yeah, I mean, criminalization, you saw the island, it's empty. I mean, nobody's there because they are afraid. And I mean, we all know that state is not able to help all these people. There are huge gaps still. There are huge gaps. And now government always saying that bad NGOs, they're bad NGOs, they take money from the people, but nobody, nobody says about the good things they did. I mean, NGOs did and still do in all islands, because also search and rescue, it was very important, because back then we had very good cooperation with Coast Guard and Frontex. I say again, back then, 2016 till December 2017, I was there. Coast Guard and Frontex was there to help people and assist people. And with us, I mean, with all search and rescue NGOs, we had not succeeded 100%, but we had a good impact to the search and rescue. So many people, I think, we saved altogether many people, again, with authorities back then. So now the gap, it's huge in Mediterranean Sea also, and also in Aegean Sea. That's why we see every 3 months, 4 months, we see, unfortunately, we see people drowning. So many people, many people, and so few. I mean, with so much. I don't know if it's correct. Fewer boats, because back then we had 150 boats per day, and we didn't have dying people in the Aegean. Now we have more with fewer boats. Sorry, son.
No, I just wanted to kind of drill that in a bit further. You were saying, Begüm, that when you go to Lesvos now and you go down memory lane and you see that the bushes are regrowing and that the camps are being replaced by football pitches, in my heart, I think that's a good thing. There shouldn't be a context where it's abnormal. It's not right that people should be drowning, that people should be having to make these journeys, that local lesbians have their homes taken away from them in a metaphorical sense, or have their communities disrupted to the extent that they clearly were. But the truth, of course, is that when you replace the football pitches without addressing the underlying problem, you haven't gotten rid of it. You've just papered over a problem rather than addressing it. And if people, as NASA say, are still drowning, then there needs to be that support there. And so I understand the aspiration to getting my football pitch back, to getting my taverna back, to getting my beach back. But there's still going to be people washing up on those shorelines dead if there isn't help provided. And so we're just jumping the gun a little bit and not focusing on what matters in this moment. Yeah,
definitely. This is the problem that I think that I observe on Lesvos. It's not the fact that it's not the issue is not the going back to whatever that normal is, but the cost of what I'm arguing is the cost of this normality is actually more and more deaths at the Aegean Sea. This is, I think, the unacceptable part, and the locals are not the ones who are necessarily fully responsible. But Sarah, in some of the talks, would constantly address not the Lesvos locals, but European citizens. You are the ones who are choosing these governments. She would repeatedly, address people towards making sure that they elect people who would protect lives. As far as I remember in the past, those were the talks that I was listening. And in my opinion, when we discuss these issues, I don't know if we're just speaking to the choir, or if I always have a sense of feeling that we're big, strong. But I do think, talking to locals on Lesvos, despite the changes on the island, nobody wants people, dying at their shores. People do not want this. The Greek people do not necessarily want people to die at their borders. They want solutions, and they definitely prefer humanitarian solutions. I think the ones who would say otherwise are very much the minority. And I believe the international solidarity is strong. I really do believe that we're not the few, we're the many, in my opinion. But on the other hand, it doesn't seem to work still. So, Sean, in my last question, to start with you, we're doing a lot. We're a lot, but we're still, what are we, what is the European public is still missing to make sure that lives are protected? What should we need to push? What do we need to do more?
I think what I often don't do appropriately is address the more fundamental fears that people have. I think it's true that most people don't want drownings to happen. Most people can understand that that people are trying to escape real hardship and deserve help. But often people also are afraid of new. They're afraid of people they don't know. And I think that the way that I have tried to engage in this conversation has only led to more polarization, because I haven't addressed some of the fundamental fears that, while I don't agree with them, I need to address. Oftentimes I think my echo chamber likes to point fingers, and as soon as someone says, I have a concern about this, they say, well, you're a racist. And I've never had a conversation that has been very productive that has begun with, you're a racist, and now listen to me. And I think what we need to do is acknowledge that people are afraid of migration. And that's not to say that they will always be afraid, but acknowledge that they are, address the reasons why people are afraid. Oftentimes it's because they're not really asylum seekers, they're actually economic migrants. Sometimes, even worse, they say these are a threat to our civilization. But we have to take those views, because in the vast majority of times they are made in good faith. And if we don't address them in good faith, we will never convince people. And so from my point of view, that is really important. We engage in a good faith conversation with people who don't yet agree with us. It's all well and good for me to sit here in what is very obviously my echo chamber and agree with both of you. And that's part of it, but it's not the whole solution.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Nassos, I have that one more. Do you want to add something? But I also have one more question.
No, it's exactly this. I mean, if we talk with people, even with people that disagree, you know, the main characteristic for people is that we are afraid. In general, we are afraid the unknown. So make people to know, to understand. It's very important for all of us.
And for that, we need to have more patience, I think. I think we also need to, we don't have to agree, as Sean says, but you know, in Greece now the elections are coming, and we recently read about the government kind of claiming refugee-free, in quotation, of course, I'm saying, cities. So how do you see, you know, what is expecting us in Greece? And do you have any hope for the coming elections, that there would be any changes in migration policies, or is migration still the hot agenda for politics? Because in 2019, in the elections, how Neo Demokratia came into power was mainly, you know, manipulating the use of migration policies. So how is the situation now?
No, now it's not the number one in their agenda, because, you know, they try to hide the refugees, the migrants, the new people, the new arrivals. So they try to hide them. So it's not the number one in their agenda. The situation is disappointing. It's not good. Some months ago, I mean, I think summer, they have a new law that says that if you are not if you don't have a social insurance, if you don't work, you cannot have medicines for free. So that, you know, aims directly to the refugees and migrants. So if you are not able to work, if you don't work, you cannot have access to medicines. So it's just one of many. Also, people that they are refugees, they are recognized refugees. They stayed 6 months in apartments, and now after 6 months they just kick them out, and people return with their families to the camps in the mainland. Just two examples that there is no much hope here. This.
Basically, Greece has never had integration policies, but the fundamental rights of people on the move. Even I understand from what you're saying, even people who are recognized as refugees do not have the access to basic rights, basically.
Exactly.
Yeah, Sean?
It might take more than a minute to say this, but if it's possible,
please do.
I think oftentimes what we end up doing is making our arguments for values, as you said, or basic rights, or in rooting it in moral grounds, because it's so obvious that we should, because people shouldn't be drowning. And it's very compelling to make a moral argument. What I've noticed is that we tend to avoid the kind of realpolitik arguments, because I think generally we don't like realpolitik arguments because it's a bit dirty and it isn't very aspirational or particularly friendly. But I think we would also win the realpolitik argument if we made it. We don't have to only make moral claims. We can make legal and realpolitik claims. So, for example, one of the reasons that one reason why criminalization of solidarity happens is because there's this idea that we are a pull factor. That means that the more search and rescue you have in the part of the water, the more people will travel through it. And therefore, basically, even if we're not found guilty, Nassos and I, of facilitating illegal entry or smuggling, we're basically smuggling, because that's the causal relationship. And so that's why we see order and why we see criminalization happening in general, to try and stop smuggling. This is the main policy shift from 2015 to 16 to 16 to 17, is to try and view this whole issue through the prism of smuggling, which has to be stopped because it's illegal. Now, the interesting thing is, as we have read, I was in prison, Nassos and I spent time in prison together, and we both read research on this. And what becomes very clear very quickly is that there's no correlation between the amount of search and rescue and the amount of smuggling happening. There just isn't. The weather is a better indicator of whether a person will travel through the water than if there is a search and rescue boat. So the question then is, well, why does smuggling happening? If the politics of the so-called migration crisis from the European Union is trying to stop smuggling, then what actually causes smuggling? Because it clearly isn't search and rescue. The interesting thing here, the realpolitik point here, is that anti-smuggling laws, as they currently stand, create the need for smuggling. Yeah. And so there's at least three facts that are important to consider here. To seek asylum, you have to be within the territory of the country you want to go to. That's the law. In order to make it into the country, you have to have the correct visa or passport. The three of us have the correct paperwork to be here. And we secure our border. We know this because that's the policy shift from 2016 to 2017. We hardened our border to try and stop people from making this journey. For example, now airline carriers can be penalized for taking people who end up making an asylum claim. So there is no other way to become an asylum seeker than to take the services of a smuggler in the context that the European Union has just set up. And so if the European Union wants to stop smuggling, then make safe routes. Then do that. Then literally do that. But it isn't doing it. And so its own realpolitik point is completely fake. It doesn't work. It doesn't work causally, never mind the moral point. And I think it's just worth drilling that point home. I'm not here trying to make the most lovely utopian point about an ideal world. I'm talking about European policies today don't fulfill their own objectives.
Exactly. No, I agree completely. Especially on smuggling. This is a whole business in a sense that they actually, in a sense, run. Basically, EU policies run smuggling networks, in my opinion.
The European Union does, its auditors sit on the outside of Libya looking into it, and they don't know where their money goes. Investigative journalism, academic reports, self-evident thinking highlights that the people who engage in the smuggling on the Libyan shoreline are the so-called Libyan Coast Guard, who is financed by whom? The European Union.
Yeah. On that note, I would like to thank you for joining me in this conversation. In the text below, audiences can find how to follow the trial and the campaign to support free humanitarians. from social media and the website. If you Google, actually, you will directly be directed to the site of the Free Humanitarians, but you can also follow them on Instagram and Twitter. And currently there's a lot of campaigns that you could also join to raise awareness, share with your friends, that are actually really nice to join. Free for swim. What was the four? There's the swimming one. Huh?
Swim for freedom.
Swim for freedom. That I want to do. The next time I'm at the pool, that's what I'm going to do. It's not, you know, it's very important to, of course, be in solidarity and raise awareness, but also I really appreciate the work you continue doing, this and making this trial actually well beyond you in terms of EU policies and politics. And so thank you very much for joining me, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks in Lesvos, hopefully.
Thank you very much.
See you there.
Thanks.
See you there. Bye-bye. Bye.